Welcome to the In Factor, conversations with entrepreneurs who started, stumbled, and succeeded. I'm Rebecca White, and I'm very pleased to welcome to the show today Mark Steenbarger. Mark is the founder of Point of View Story. He's a software developer who went on to get a Master of Fine Arts. And so he's a creative filmmaker and a self described moment maker. So I'm very excited to dig in and find out more about what it means to make moments and how he found his way from software development to Point of View Story, which has a very powerful mission about helping people heal. So, Mark, thank you for joining me today.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me, Rebecca. It's great to be here.
Yeah, so
Love it.
I love your background. I love to talk to people that have a wide variety of experiences, as you have. They usually always have interesting stories, and based on the name of your your endeavor, your venture, it sounds like we have a common value on telling stories. So let's get started by first of all talking about what is Point of View Story. What do you do, and what is this company all about?
Yeah, point of view story. Um, it's a pivoting of a comedy troupe I started called Point of View Comedy, and but the notion of it is still there. Where even when we were doing improv comedy, we wanted it to be from the audience's point of view. And now, as we transition to film, and not always being comedic in nature, a little more sober and subject matter. The idea of point of view story of creating moments in film where it allows the viewer to put themselves into the story. And it really is a processing a reflection of their point of view in the story. So point of view story just made sense. And so that's kind of how we named it. But the idea is when somebody's gone through a horrific experience like complex trauma, specifically in our case, it's around those who have been harmed by violence and commercial sexual exploitation. The healing journey can be really difficult, and a lot of concepts of just what's happened mentally make it really, really hard to access some of those feelings or some of those beliefs, those held beliefs. And film and story specifically, I mean, film is just the medium. It's the story that, well, it's both, but the story allows the viewer to be able to identify, access, experience, relate to things that in normal top-down type therapies or modalities can be not as effective. Also, complex trauma is not as well developed in terms of modalities like we do for PTSD or some of the other things out there. So it's great to bring film to the table. And then film itself as a medium does have other properties like the 7 types of intelligence that brings the containment that it brings, and the visuals, and of course the music and the score and the sounds, and so all the things that engages the somatic component of it too. So film really does bring a somatic piece while also having a conversation around it, which brings a little bit of that top-down piece. So it has kind of best of both worlds, I think. I think it was the body keeps the score somewhere. I said we only have 3 choices: top down, bottom up, and medicine. So if we can, and I mean nothing wrong with medicine, but if we can create a somatic experience that can unlock somebody on a healing journey, that's what we want to do. So I teamed up with an LCSW. She has over 11 years of experience eyeball to eyeball with survivors, and so she and our membership community helps craft these short films that we create that are narrative, meaning fictional. That runtime is on average just 5 minutes, because it's the conversation that happens after watching the film that the magic happens.
Wow, wow. Okay, so there's a lot in there I'd like to learn more about, and I think most of our listeners would as well. I definitely want to get into the business side of the
Yes.
arts as well. But before we do, I want to ask you, I've got several questions on my mind. The first one is, how did you find your way to? I saw that you had a software development um, degree
Right.
and background and work, and then you went and got a master's of fine arts. And for people who don't know, that's a that is a terminal degree really in the arts field. So I
Right.
don't know if you were headed towards teaching or if this was actually which it sounds like you're doing that actually in what you do. But how did you find your way, and what led you to this? Were there personal experiences that you had, or other parts
Yeah.
of your story that you'd be willing to share?
So yeah, when I was in high school, we'll just say it was in the '90s and leave it at that. The menu wasn't very broad, and it's just your classic school things. And fortunately, though, computer programming was on that list, and it was something I enjoyed and was decent at grade wise. So I thought, let's pursue that, and I really enjoyed the logic side of things and solving problems. And so I just made that my career, film. And I think even to this day, definitely when I was younger, arts was not a profession to consider. It's just starving artists, right? That cliche. And to make a living as an artist was so discouraged, I didn't even consider it. And so I went with the popular menu of the science, maths, literature and stuff. So I went with computer science and I pursued it, got a Bachelor of Science degree from Taylor University, and then entered the workforce straight in and did it for 29 years. But under the current of all that, I was also enjoying performing. I did a improv audition at college and I failed horribly, but it was elating. It was just an amazing experience. So after college, I just began to get my feet wet in live theater, community theater, taking classes, and just kind of weekend warrior type approach to it. And that's where I just love moving an audience. And it was my wife Jill who said, because I started thinking like, man, I like theater, but I also like improv, and I was doing stand up, and I was like, am I just a guy who can't commit to a path? And am I Enneatype number 7 that just can't finish things? But my wife said, no, you love creating moments, and that's what ties it all together. And I was like, oh, that feels so right. And it was just creating moments for the audience. And so parallel to that, she was starting in around 2016, 2018, she was working with trafficked youth here in Indianapolis. And as I began to get educated on what's really happening, because I did not have an accurate view, I heard that term, I assumed it was something overseas. I did not think it was something that was in my own backyard. And as I began to learn about it, my heart was just moved, and I was like, how can we create a moment for them? And obviously, I can't go in and do a live performance. That's not scalable, or from a business perspective, not very viable. But film is. We can send film into a healing center agency. And I didn't know this either, but there are hundreds of these homes around the country and around the world where survivors get to live and get restored. Typically, a 2-year program. Some are less, some are longer, where somebody coming out of that life gets to be equipped and gets to heal. And so that's our partners. That's where we're sending these films into to create these moments. So, but it's interesting because I do feel my two worlds merged. And my day job was being software, working in like FDA type work, and in the evenings and weekends doing stand up. So to create film, you need that artistic piece, but you also need that tedious ability to run software in the editing room and make sure your quality is there. And so testing and refining is a tedious and sometimes numbing experience that you got to keep pressing through. So I really feel both worlds just really kind of merged, and I'm so grateful to be able to do this work.
Yeah, I love that story. And, for anybody that's listening, and we do have a lot of students that are listening, and as an educator, I find that, many of them know they want to do something transformative, or transformational for others and for themselves, but they don't know where that is. And, I'm a big believer in the intersection and where we find creative outcomes is in the intersection
Yes.
of disciplines. And so I think, and what's interesting is you couldn't have known where this was going to take you. You had to be able to kind of go with it.
Yes.
And your software background, in today's world, virtually every business is technology enabled. So
Yeah.
it's a great place to start, I think.
Yeah, they told us. Yeah, and the MFA piece that just came in. It was my wife said you can't YouTube filmmaking. So while I had some stage experience, it really was getting some formal training. And the College of Fine Arts in Vermont is a great VCFA is a great program where it's a mentor type arrangement. So I what a great way to learn than have a successful filmmaker kind of looking over your work and mentoring you essentially for 2 years. So that's why I pursued the MFA, just to kind of catch myself up on the film specific art, to merge it with the
Yeah.
actor piece.
Yeah, I think education from the time I was in school anyway, and that's been a long time ago. But as an educator, we have become more and more applied in the way we teach, and especially in fields like entrepreneurship or in many of the arts. Of course, it's been probably more applied. But
Yeah,
so I love your story. I think it's really fascinating, and I have to ask about the improv side. I just
yeah.
can't let that go. It that would be one of the scariest things in the world for me. What does it feel like to get up there? And you said you failed miserably, so I just have to ask about that. What's it like to do improv, and do you still do it? And are you just the person at a party that can always come up with the right response? Because I never can.
Yeah, so that audition in college was a failed experience, but like I said, it lit something inside me, and so I went and got training in comedy sports. They're around the nation, and there's one here in Indy. I took training from them, got on board there, and then eventually branched out on my own. And uh, I would say I got decent at it. And there are rules to improv. This idea of yes anding, and once that point of view comedy kind of sets set, we were beginning to pivot to point of view story. My wife and I would go into a recovery home here in Indy for women coming out of addiction or coming out of incarceration. And so we just provided it as kind of a tool, because improv historically was a teaching tool for actors. It was the performance value or the entertainment value of it was discovered later. And then we have Whose Line Is It Anyway and all those others that kind of commercialized it. But it was a training tool in the beginning. And so like to bring that into a space like that, we were able to share in a very fun and engaging way things like yes anding. Like if you can do that, not only in party or social settings, but if you can go into an interview or if you can go into a relationship and just use some of those tools, it can actually help you succeed in places when perhaps your experiences kind of created protective factors or something of that nature where you may not respond as well. So if we can arm them with those tools, improv does well. And yeah, there's just some core rules that if you commit to them, they kind of work out for you, and you get some fun and some memorable moments for sure. And it's
You know that yeah, I think that's something I want to learn in my in my encore because I've done a little bit of you mentioned yes and ing
right.
yes anding, but it's basically as I recall, so you say something and I say yes and it leads us down a path and as those rules of improv and walking in and working with those um, individuals that had been through a lot of trauma, I can just imagine that a few minutes of relief
Yeah.
because your mind is probably occupied and I live in Tampa, Florida right now, and there is a huge problem in some of this part of the country with trafficking, as you know, I'm
Yes.
sure.
Totally. Yeah.
And it is shocking sometimes to know that these kinds of things go on in our backyard. So I just commend you for that, and I just find it fascinating, and it's interesting. Almost everything that people do, there are some rules, right, and that can be learned.
Yeah, totally. I mean, music, I mean, we're all familiar with music. We've all probably seen a score or some sort of music, bass clef, treble clef at some point in our lives. And if you think about it, there's a very finite number of notes, A, B, C, D, F, G that we use. And all of music is written and scored and composed with just those. Now there's the sharps and the flats, but that's a pretty small set of rules, if you will, or notes.
Variables, maybe.
Yeah, variables. And so for them to create the music that we have is amazing. So yeah, to always compare it to something like that. I
Yeah.
think we all have that experience,
Yeah.
and film too. Like I'm also a screener for a local festival, and it's my continuing education. I get to pre-screen a couple of hundred shorts a year, and just like, why does that work? How do we, when we try to tell too much or we say too much instead of showing it, all those types of little rules or conventions can really help increase the story. Robert McKee has a lot of good materials on the rules of storytelling that are invaluable. Yeah, and you kind of, as you learn those, then also rules, when you know when to break them, then that's also effective. But you have to
Right.
understand them
Right.
first.
Absolutely. And, as I'm listening to you, I'm getting excited about thinking about bringing this into my graduate class because
Yes.
I've seen a few people do it, but I've been afraid to. But I'm going to go. I might offline get in touch with you about learning some of
Okay.
those rules. So
Yeah, I would love to. We'll
yeah,
love that.
yeah. Say thank you. I always learn so much from all my guests, so I'm excited about this. I want to get back to what you do at Point of View Story. Is Point of View Story a for profit or a not for profit business?
Yes. So we are. So social enterprise isn't a legal status, right?
Right.
And I don't know how you would define it, but there's a website, Good Market. They acknowledge us as a social enterprise, and for me, we are on the books we're an LLC,
Uh-huh.
but we're doing altruistic work, and then I do have a fiscal agent. So for those not familiar with a fiscal agent, it is their mission is to support filmmakers. So they are a 501c3, and so folks can donate to them, to my fiscal agent, and then that allows them to disperse dollars to us for our operation costs of creating the films. But
That's
on the day, but the day
yeah.
to day is an LLC. Yeah.
Yeah, and as you point, social enterprise, it does vary state by state in terms of the legal entity and description of it. But there are, what I can tell you among a lot of the young entrepreneurs that I work with is they often have a social mission,
Yeah.
and they learning about social enterprise versus a not for profit, and understanding that a not for profit is really a tax status and not
Yes.
easy to get, but you can still have a social mission, and
Yes.
you can still have a primary goal of a transformational improvement and change in the lives of others, and have a business that actually can be profitable.
Yeah.
And what you do with that as an entrepreneur is up to you, right? I mean, you can still be a philanthropist and change the world. So there's
Oh,
a lot of ways to go about making a difference in the world through a
100%.
through a
Yes.
venture. Yeah, through a
Yes. Very much so.
business.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
yeah, the NGO overhead right now, it is myself and the LCSW that I work with, Emily Taylor Ginger, and then our crew, which is just when we're filming and we do meet, as we're creating the scripts and things of that nature. But being a small, so getting a board and just a lot of the NGO overhead didn't make sense for
Yeah.
us. So
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
social enterprise model with a fiscal agent seems to fit pretty well.
Yeah. So an OCSW, a form of social worker, right? So tell us what that is. And
Yeah, sorry, L as in Larry. Yeah, LCSW,
oh, LTSW. Okay.
L Charlie SW. So licensed
LT.
clinical social worker. So Emily has her master's of social work, and then the L part comes in. It's a licensure that folks can get. I'm not obviously taking that test, but I'm told it's like the SAT times two, and it is an exhaustive test. And there's prep work, obviously, you have to go through before it. But once you get on the other side, you have that licensure to be an LCSW. So she has a master's degree and this licensure, which is pretty popular in the medical world for therapists and counselors. And there's others too. There's MHLPs, and yeah, there's a lot of them out there.
Designation. Yes. Of
But yeah,
social
and
worker.
then
Yes.
she just personally chose to pursue this population almost directly straight out of college, and so now she's a private clinician in Austin, Texas, and seeing her own clients directly. So she connected with her here in Indianapolis when she was working for an actual agency, one of our members, and then she transitioned to that in Austin, Texas. So that's her background, and it's invaluable for us to understand where somebody going through this experience, where do they get stuck, and where they get stuck is a great opportunity to bring a film in to help them be able to process that. So like choices, for example, somebody who's gone through a horrific experience like that can own way too much. And so they just tell themselves, well, it's my fault that I got duped into trafficking. It's my fault that I went to that party where I met him. It's my fault, my fault. And that's really hard to convince otherwise. Even no matter what you say to them, it just falls on deaf ears. But if we can show a film where they connect with a character, and what a facilitator would do is like, is it her fault that she fell asleep on the bus? Is it her fault that they can find compassion for that person? And then they're able then to change the conversation. And in that simple one-off move, we're seeing a lot of folks get unlocked and be able to realize, hey, wait a minute, it wasn't my fault. And then they're able to move forward and get some healing from that.
Yeah, that is so powerful and so interesting. So how does this work for you? So I'm just curious about the whole side, the business side as well as the production side. Do you actually does your partner, the social working partner, do they reach out to you? Does she reach out to you and say, "I've got a need for a film in this space," and you create it uniquely? Do you create a catalog of these films,
Yeah.
and do you sell them one by one? And is it, do you how do you make money with this too? So
Right.
I'm curious about both sides.
Yeah, no, and those were all things we considered, every single one of them. And so where we landed is the catalog approach. So there's a third party tool called Uscreen, the letter U Screen, and they provide a paywall where you can host your visual content. So Emily works shoulder to shoulder with me on an ongoing basis, and we're creating 2 to 4 films a year that would continue to add to this catalog. So then our members and our agencies pay an annual subscription to get access to these films. And then she creates all the psychotherapeutic content that comes with it. So what questions to ask? What does readiness look like? What are outcomes of each of these films? And get really in the clinical space with that. And so what film do we make next is really ultimately her call, but she's listening to our members and her own experience in those clinical rooms of like, where am I seeing folks get stuck? And then we go and we'll create that film. We share the concept with our community so they can speak into it, help us shape it. And then I go and I co-write it with my actors and crew, and then we'll execute and actually produce the film. And then once we complete it, we add it to the platform. We're currently at 10 and counting. We're shooting number 11 as we speak, last weekend and this weekend. And we'll have a 12th one. We're doing 2 actually as we speak. So number 11, number 12, and they'll be available like by October, mid to late October. And then we'll also already be starting on number 13. So constantly creating 2 to 4 a year, adding them to our catalog, and then members pay an annual subscription of $2,100 a year that gets access to those films. And she also then facilitates just like the onboarding, and we do monthly film reviews where we kind of break down a film, show the beats of it and the clinical values and the great talking points. And so, yeah, she's very much a part of it and helps me curate the content. And if you Google cinema therapy, you'll see there's been this idea of taking a movie clip and put it into a therapeutic setting. And so I think what we're doing that we haven't seen anybody really doing this, where we're actually creating and curating the content from scratch with this in mind. So if you take a clip out of Inside Out, it's a great movie for this type of work. Good Will Hunting has great moments you could harvest out. But those films weren't made with the therapeutic audience in mind. And so we are, but taking that same idea and then also just making it more turnkey, where you can just log in, click play, and you get to watch your 5-minute film.
Wow, I love this. And that from a business perspective, that makes so much sense, I think.
Yeah,
Again, I go back to my background as an educator, and I've used film and excerpts from film and podcasts and all of that, but it's partly why I create my own podcasting, do my own podcasting, because it was always kind of hard to find podcasts that were exactly what I wanted. So I enjoy it for a lot of reasons, because I just
for
love
sure.
learning about people, but and stories. But I just love what you're doing, and I think that makes a lot of sense. And having a subscription based business, is a direction that many people are going these days, of course, and have been for a while. Um, and I think probably one of your biggest challenges might be marketing, although maybe it's a small world in terms of meeting clients. So I'm just curious. I'm sure your partner has been a big help there, but
Oh my gosh.
what kind of marketing do you do to compete with some of the others that are out there, maybe pulling excerpts from films? I know you have that unique advantage, but how do you get that message out to all the people that could actually use this in their clinical work?
Yeah, there are several conferences a year. If you Google anti-trafficking conferences, any one of those would be a good one for us to go to. The ones we've committed to, Shared Hope is a nonprofit that puts one on called Juvenile Sex Trafficking, or JUST for short. And we've shown up there for several years, and just having a table and exhibiting has created a lot of contacts for us. The Department of Family and Protective Services in Texas, they also have an annual conference that we go to, and that's created good contacts. And then the Sheltered Alliance, or the National Trafficking Sheltered Alliance, or NTSA for short, they put an annual conference in Utah, which is specifically for sheltering, and that's really our sweet spot, because we want to get in the hands of the folks that are doing more of that longitudinal care, that 2 years or more, versus the acutes, first 90 days, because there's just a lot of work that needs to be done in terms of disassociation and just stabilization that takes place those first 30, 60, 90 days. So not a good fit for us. We're trying to process things. So that 2-year programs. And so those conferences have been really great in just connecting us to people and coalitions across the nation and getting us out there. And so that has really, we still have about 180 open leads that we just haven't even reached out to, just from attending these conferences.
Yeah, I think you've done something that's really challenging for a lot of entrepreneurs, and that is you have narrowed your focus to
Yeah,
a niche.
very
And
much. Yeah.
there's a saying that the riches are in the niches, and a big part of the challenge is you could do this for so many other. You mentioned the term complex
Yes.
trauma, and you've chosen trafficking as the area to focus on, which enables you to get very specific about your audience. So I think that's a phenomenal move to make as an entrepreneur, and one that, as I said, I think many founders struggle with. Have you had any other opportunities, and has it been challenging to stay focused on that? Do you plan to? And I'm not knowing specifically the definition of complex trauma. I'm assuming there are a lot of other directions you could go if
Yes.
you want to build and grow this.
Yeah. And in some ways, there's organic movements just of our members. So, for example, the Department of Child Services of Indiana is a member, and they're using it as a more of a training tool.
Mhm.
Um, the beauty of film and storytelling is there's no talking head. It's like watching a movie, and how you interpret that movie is as limited as you. And so if you want to utilize it in a training, great. And but to your point, yes, like when you think of complex trauma, basically it's someone who's experienced repeated trauma. So a lot of these survivors, they've gone through just literally several sexual harmful experiences, versus someone who's gone through fewer might just experience PTSD or just some other um, types of trauma. But the complex trauma is complex. It's, as a quick summary that NARN put out there, is it becomes shame based, where PTSD is fear based. And so unpacking those things just is all, and all the things on the layers. But as you span out, like you think about sexual assault, well, that's typically folks that have probably experienced maybe just harmful boyfriends or harmful relationships. And then even another ring out from that would be like domestic violence. And so, and a lot of those services, like domestic violence specifically, have been around for 40 plus years. So they're well dialed in. And so we could easily be implemented, included in those. We're just not actively marketing to them, but if somebody were to come along, they could absolutely utilize it in their space. So I think as time permits, and as we can and add content that can kind of cross over into some of those situations, because a lot of the subject matter is very similar, right? And what does trust mean, and what's healthy, as I mentioned earlier, choice making and identity. And as you tackle those, they can definitely be applicable in multiple spaces, even in, for lack of a better word, general counseling.
Sure, sure, absolutely. I could see a lot of application, and the way you're building this company, the product itself could be used, as you pointed out, in a wide variety of contexts.
Oh,
So that I think is powerful. It's just a matter of um, I'll give you an example, a story. I've been around creatives all my life. My mom was an entrepreneur, and she was an artist and
nice.
a florist. And my daughter studied art therapy in college. And anyway, so I've been around, and I consider myself creative. Maybe not in some of the arts, but in my own way. And I'm very supportive of it. But I believe virtually every artist needs some entrepreneurship skills, this entrepreneurial mindset, because if you're moving out and you're doing something different, it absolutely is going to require a lot of the same recognizing opportunities, taking action, executing past failure. All those things are a big part of the artist's world, and raising money and getting sponsors and all
Yes.
those things that entrepreneurs have to do. So for a long time, I've been a proponent. I've been in education for a long time, but I've been a proponent of entrepreneurship in the arts, because I think it can really be helpful. But as you think about, your wife inspired you, and so I'm curious about your company. I think you mentioned there's just a few of you now, at this point, and I think that's always one of the challenges. Are you growing this organically? Do you have, how are you thinking about the future of Point of View Story?
Yeah. Yeah. So I shared the membership model, and we also, with the fiscal agent, were able to raise kind of, for lack of, our seed money. I use air quotes because it wasn't a lot, but, and so doing little fundraisers around town, winning a couple grants, those things kind of put us gas in the tank before we had members. So, and we're kind of straddling that. We do have members now. We're up to almost 20 members. Um, but we're still burning some of those raised dollars and continue to raise those dollars. But as we transition and we become fully membership supported, I feel like that's when we will be more viable. And then as that grows, then we can begin to look at hiring. And so what I do today is I take advantage. The Small Business Association, almost in every state, I believe, has a program called SCORE, SCORE, and they offer free counseling and training. And I just had my monthly SCORE call this morning, and that's invaluable. There's other cohorts. There's one here called Generator with the number eight generator called G Beta Main Street. I was fortunate enough to participate in that, which puts me in an ecosystem with them, and they have access to interns and college students, and so very affordable ways to engage folk to help push on the work, but also in a way that's financially doable when we're still kind of straddling the raised dollars and trying to get to the fully market-based dollars.
Yeah.
Well, that's kind of been the loose plan. And we would love to also even create opportunities for those coming out of exploitation, be able to because we have all these resources, we have all these people that we have access to. That if we can also even through our work help somebody um, gain employment and as they call it, work in the square world. Uh, if we could play a role in that and delegating some of that work to them, that would be a great win-win as well. So
Yeah.
that's kind of our dreams and aspirations. And right now, we think we're about a year and a half to two getting fully membership.
Yeah. I was going to ask you, when did you start Point of View Story?
So we hit record on the first film in late 2019, right before COVID hit the fan. And so crazily, we built this under COVID, you could argue. So I worked with one actor, um, and we were a low budget, shoestring budget, like zero budget film. And we made our first three. Then we started raising dollars and we got to our first six. I went to the master's program, got feedback on the first six, and began to raise dollars. And so now we're able to pay our actors full SAGA rate, day rates, and we have a full audio mixer and a boom operator and a lighting guy. So we've been able to spiral up into that regard. But yeah, so
You
that's
know,
kind of start 2019. Yeah.
yeah, interest that was kind of my that's what I was curious about, is if you have been doing this since, prior to COVID. Interestingly, I launched my podcast in November of 19. So, and
Oh,
yeah, so the timing is kind of interesting because I think what I found, and maybe you did as well, but COVID brought a lot of trauma and challenge to all of us, but it also brought some opportunity,
it really did.
and some of that was time and access to people that maybe we would not have had otherwise. And we advanced as a society in terms of our use of technology, probably
Yes.
10 years in 10 months in 2020. So
I tell people COVID normalized Zoom.
yeah,
And
yeah,
because of that, that's a lot of our lead gen is through Zoom calls.
yeah,
And it was always phone, and it was awkward to like, why would I want to see you? So now it's like, hey, you want to hop on a Zoom and nobody blinks. And it still isn't as good as in person, but at least we get to have a face-to-face
yeah,
conversation.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah. And I am. We really did benefit from COVID in that regard. It just normalized a lot of the way that we operate, and we just filmed a lot outside. It's just how we kind of navigated, but it was actually um, ended up being a positive for us.
Yeah, I think this is true in life, but also in business, that challenge often leads us to be more creative.
Yes.
We have to find solutions. And I'm curious. I wrote a book recently about entrepreneurial mindset and identified three competencies: the ability to recognize opportunities, the willingness to take action, and the perseverance and resilience to execute past failure. So I just have to ask you about that third element of success as an entrepreneur. Um, you know, I think fear of failure is a problem for many people, all of us at some point probably. And I know as a performer, as a creative, you've had to get comfortable with negative feedback and doing things that people don't understand. So I'm curious about your thoughts about overcoming failure and executing past failure. Do you have any examples or anything you could share on your entrepreneurial journey? Times maybe you were close to giving up, or how you've used the inevitable challenges that you faced. on the path?
Yeah. Yeah. Obviously, money. Can we monetize this, and can we make it? We still don't fully know this answer, but can we get the memberships faster than we're burning, and so we don't run out? Um, and that's just something you have to just keep batting to the back of your head. Um, and so I'm a film guy, and so like doing calls, sales calls, and things of that nature, I dreaded at the beginning. It was horrifically like I had to psych myself up. And I took one coaching through Action Coach, which I think is also a national coaching program. And he said, reward yourself after every win and whatever you define a win. And for me, I was like, okay, we can do hard things. So like just getting to the other side of that phone call, no matter how it went, but just celebrating we did that phone call and go treat myself to a coffee at the coffee shop 5 minutes down the road. Like just to get your body to be rewarded, like, oh, at least there's a coffee on the other side of this, like just whatever carrot I had to give myself. Because the sales side is definitely the area I had the least amount of experience. Being a software engineer, I worked for a company, I never had to see the sales side. And so going out there, and when folks don't return calls or don't return emails, it was early on, you just take it personally. And because you believe you got the greatest thing since sliced bread, why would anybody want this? And so I think just growing and maturing in the mindset of like, hey, people are busy. There's curriculums out there that they may feel fit, and classic just value add, right? And I did learn that early on. I appreciate people like Seth Godin and folks like that, where if you have value, and if you don't, either the value is not committed or it's just not valuable to them. And so realizing how can I bring value to the table every time, and to help me even mitigate the dreadery, I'm like, just always bring value. So I'm like, don't email, hey, have you decided? Like, hey, here's an article, or hey, I saw you guys just opened a new location. Congrats. So I still get that touch point, but I'm bringing value or bringing warmth or bringing humanity to the conversation, and that's definitely been the hardest piece. And then probably just stepping away. So I straddled doing computer science, doing the programming. I was fortunate enough to be in a position where we're project based, client based. So I just took on fewer clients, which freed up. So I was able to kind of blend the two worlds, but it's tempting just to stay on that blend indefinitely, but then you can't
Yeah.
really invest. So taking the risk of leaving that fully behind a year ago and say, okay, we're just going to be all in. And so I know for a lot of people, things like, well, how am I going to get health insurance? Like, those problems are easy to solve, like making the hard phone calls. And so, oddly enough, I also attend Al Anon, which, if people aren't familiar with that, it's for family members of alcoholics, which doesn't sound like a business thing. But the meat of it is how to be okay when others aren't okay. And in this context, it makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
So if an agency doesn't email me back, that's okay. If they say they don't get it, and I've never had anything harshly personally thrown at me, but the no's or the no thank yous or the lack of responding, just being like, hey, they might have something else higher priority. Maybe they don't have residents right. Like, they're just realizing there's so much, and the beauty of it is the ones that do get it are so rewarding. It's like that great golf shot that keeps bringing you back. And so those wins, I, like everybody else, I post them on my wall. I remind myself, I jot them down, and that's what motivates you to keep going. And there's been people that have just been amazing where they said, Mark, this is phenomenal. And Rebecca, I've never had anybody look at my source code that I wrote and said, this is phenomenal. So when you get that kind of feedback, it really fuels you for the next century. So that's been super helpful. So the wins are big wins. Celebrate those hard. Tell your body this was worth it. And then a buddy of mine said this morning. He goes, it's hard and it won't get easier, but it will get better. And that makes so much sense. And even in making these calls, I'm more comfortable with it. It's still hard, but it's better. And I want to bring value. And I do feel like we have something that has huge value, and we have amazing stories and evidence that it's moving the needle But if somebody doesn't get it, like that's okay too. And the other thing that's helpful is no is for no today. Who knows? A new executive director could come in tomorrow. That clinician could go to another location. And I feel like our brains, at least mine did, is very definitive. So it's like, we'll never get that place. Well, today, and I realize it's naive of me to think that the day I reach out is the perfect day for them to engage. Like, why do I think that? So just realizing some of these, it's really staying in touch for a year, and then they convert. And so just realizing, letting go of the timelines, letting go of the expectations. There's an Al-Anon phrase called Q-tip, like you clean your ears with Q-tip. Quit taking it personally.
Yeah.
And that's been really huge in the failure side of things, because for me, it's when we take our failures personally, and then it's our identity, right? Like I failed or we failed, but like failure, we get to define what failure is, and I love those quotes that talk about failure. Just is you only failed when you stop, and so keep on keeping on, embrace the wins, you know, document them. And then that becomes the fuel to move on. And people quit. They say they don't quit their job; they quit their boss. So just surrounding yourself with amazing people also helps. Working with Emily has been amazing. My wife is amazing, and so just to work with people, great humans, it just makes the work so much a delight and a joy. And so the hard days become less hard because the good days are extremely good.
I love all of that. And it's so well said. And I think you bring up one of the biggest challenges for many entrepreneurs. They get into their business because they love filmmaking or they love making furniture or whatever it is that they do. But the business side of it is something they've never done. And it can be really challenging. And recognizing that and growing in that, and sometimes surrounding yourself with somebody else that can take on some of
Yeah.
that as well. But so well said. I love all of that, and I appreciate you sharing that
Yeah.
because I think it's a classic challenge that a lot of entrepreneurs have. I could talk another hour, but I know you've got things to do, and we may have to have you back on the show another
Well done,
time.
man. Yeah.
Yeah, it's just been such a great conversation. I always end by asking, and you've already given us so much great advice, but if you had one piece of advice that you wish you had had before you
Mm.
started down this path, that might have made your life and your business a little bit easier, what would that
Oh, yeah.
one nugget be?
Oh man, that is, yeah. I mean, the Q-tip is huge. It's really huge. But I think um, be curious, and I say that because it's twofold. Our work is based on being curious. If you try to fix somebody who has a held belief, whether that's a political belief or a personal belief, words don't move the needle. But if we can be curious, we can learn. You can learn who you're sitting next to and have conversations that lead to that. And so, for on this side of it, being curious is like, okay, that didn't work. How can we be? How could this work? Or are there other ways? So just and then just sit in it. When the emotions rise and um, you want to get defensive for some reason, you want to fire off that email and defend yourself or what have you, like don't. And so just be comfortable sitting in whatever tension you're feeling, and remain curious. So sit in it, and while you're sitting, stay curious. And lastly, because those two things will create a sense of presence. Somebody said that we spend 70% of the time either in the future or in the past with where our thoughts are. I don't know how they measure that, but it feels right. So how can we be more present? And I feel like if we can sit in the moment of the bad news, or I'm not sure if we're going to get there, like let's just sit in it and let's just be curious. And then the answers seem to present themselves if we can just hold tight and sit still for a second.
I love it. I love it. And you'll be glad to know, I think, I hope, that you're in good company with the Be Curious, because I think Richard Branson, not on my podcast, but gave a similar answer, arguably one of the most successful entrepreneurs today. He said that's what curiosity is, what really differentiates successful from unsuccessful entrepreneurs. But I love your response. I think getting our minds in the right place is a big part of the battle, and that's what you're talking about there.
Yeah,
So,
yeah,
so
mindset is so huge.
yeah,
And like time management is a whole thing we spend another hour on, like, because I realize like avoidance shows up in there, and we can
sure,
just put it on, well, we don't have time for that. Well, like, I'm really avoiding it. But like, how do we push through the avoidance, so we can still make those phone calls or make that document or do that thing that's just not fun? And then, yeah, and how do we find out our own rhythm so we can push through those things? Because
yeah,
at the
it's
end of the day, it is just mindset, even on that front.
yeah. And you also brought up the importance of surrounding yourself and getting in networks and ecosystems, and
Yeah,
that can help us as well, I think. So great advice all the
yeah,
way through. I loved our conversation, Mark. Thank you so much. I would love for you to tell us where we can find out more about you, and and how we can even support Point of View
yeah.
Story, because I think it's a marvelous mission,
Thank
and
you.
I thank you for that work.
No, I appreciate it. Thank you for having me today. And I just, we're just feel honored and blessed that people see us and feel seen is a great mentally experience. And our website is, as the name implies, pointofviewstory.com. Because of our fiscal agent, we can take donations. So if there's corporations that want to come alongside us, we have breakdowns on our large expenses that can help us there. But as you know, members is what will sustain us. And so introductions to those, serving those who have been harmed by commercial sexual exploitation would do, and that's just an invitation, and could cost you nothing, but it would mean the world to us and create that relationship and connect us. But yeah, pointofviewstory.com, and also happy to share a film, and just if anybody wants to see one, we're happy to do a call like that. And you can book us on our website, and also actors that would be interested in acting. We now have a place under the About section where we can engage with actors and crew members who will help tell these stories and get these stories out there. So
It's
yeah, I love
wonderful.
it.
Wonderful. Well, I'm excited to share your story, and thank you so much for your time today. I loved it.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Thanks so much.